So we always try to start with a more niche product or solve a niche problem for a very small user base at first. And I'm pronouncing that the Canadian way, niche instead of niche. So that's a big focus for us for any new brands that we're launching, or even just existing brands where we want to kind of hone in on one niche and really serve them well. So we get a lot of organic referrals and they start telling their friends, because really that's the best way to market anything, is to get organic referrals, because you're not paying for that and everyone's happy.
Welcome to the Strategic Momentum Podcast, the show where we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders on what it takes to break through that business inertia and propel you and your business forward. I'm your host, Connie Steele. In the last episode, we talked to Mehtab Bhogal, co-founder of the private equity firm Karta Ventures, about how he and his partners drive value for the businesses they advise. If you haven't listened to it yet, I highly recommend going back and checking it out first. Today, Mehtab expands on the millennial business mindset as it relates to their approach around product development and marketing strategy. Let's begin with what Mehtab and Karta Ventures believe is important to take into account when launching a new business. It's the notion of starting very small.
You have a strong focus on ensuring you start with a tight community and know their interests intimately. And I know certainly that's where you've always gained significant traction in your past businesses because of that. So let's talk more about that.
So for anyone launching a direct-to-consumer brand or digital-first brand, or even just a retailer or really anything, I think the big thing to kind of keep in mind is that if you're going for a massive market right off the bat, a big boy can usually come in and manufacture the product for less money than you can, or serve that market better than you can, because the market's big enough for it to be worth their time. So we always try to start with a more niche product or solve a niche problem for a very small user base at first. And I'm pronouncing that the Canadian way, niche instead of niche. So that's a big focus for us for any new brands that we're launching, or even just existing brands where we want to kind of hone in on one niche and really serve them well. So we get a lot of organic referrals and they start telling their friends, because really that's the best way to market anything, is to get organic referrals, because you're not paying for that and everyone's happy. So we typically start on tight-knit communities. For example, on the guitar side, our guitar pedal it caters to a subgenre of metal called progressive metal, and then a subgenre of progressive metal called gent, which I guarantee nobody's heard of. But it started off there, and then it's kind of spread out organically, just because the first batch of users were so happy with the product and it solved their exact problem. We were part of that user base too. Like I've been playing that style of music since I was 15 or 16. So it works. And then talking to actual people whose problems you think you're solving and getting their input goes a long way. And they love it too. Nobody ever gets mad if you're like, hey, what do you think of this product? They like that the brand's talking to them and actually respecting them, as opposed to just trying to shove a product down their throat. So we really focus on building an evangelist user base, if that makes sense. It kind of goes out and spreads the message organically. And this all kind of stems too from having no money to start, because you're not going to go out and launch a product at a very low price point and actually be competitive, because someone with a bigger war chest will come along and eat your lunch. So getting more niche, and then obviously the more niche you are, the higher price point you can really charge, which builds an actual brand too. It goes a long way.
Certainly, it sounds like you're talking about creating a laser focus on an audience and ensuring you know them inside and out, which is core to fundamentals of marketing and starting an effective business and product that aligns to their needs. So what do you think companies are still getting wrong when it comes to trying to sell to these communities? Because I'm sure that they've also looked into that path, but as you mentioned, they haven't been necessarily successful.
Probably the best example is big companies using terrible, outdated memes to try and market where it's clearly not authentic. Someone in marketing was like, hey, we should use more memes to market. That's what's trendy with the kids nowadays, like 4 years later. And it just comes across as so not very authentic. And they're focused more on the transaction itself versus, hey, let's build a relationship first and then see how we can add value. It's more of a, how can we sell them this? Instead of a, hey, let's find out what your problems are and then work with you to help solve them. Yeah, it's more of a transaction versus relationship mentality. And then a lot of companies also just kind of jump into applying tactics. So they might have heard of, oh, hey, yeah, why don't we market on Reddit? Everyone's marketing on Reddit. They'll just jump in there without bothering to kind of learn what the culture's like and how it fits in with the existing user base. And then kind of simultaneously, they'll do things like create a product and just hope everyone likes it, which is something small companies and big companies are both guilty of, especially smaller, new entrepreneurs. So I think it doesn't come across as very authentic. Like you actually care about the user when you're coming in and just trying to sell them something versus talking to them, figuring out what their exact issues are, and then saying, hey, look, I have a solution for you, or I can build you a solution. It's going to solve your problem and you're going to be happy with it. And then you're going to tell your friends.
So what do you think it really takes to make sure that you are truly part of the fabric of the community? I mean, certainly you've been part of one and created one earlier in your career, but of a new one that you go into, what are those steps and what are the things that you have to do to make it feel and demonstrate that you are authentic?
So I think the only real way to do that is to be a part of the target audience. And I've obviously, we own a women's shoe retailer that's value oriented. I'm not really part of that community just inherently. My feet are too big to wear heels. So I think a big part of that is working with someone who is part of that audience. So for example, with Lucy Avenue, the value oriented kind of shoe retailer, women's clothing retailer, the founder, she is literally the target audience. And her merchandising approach was more of like, hey, I think this is cool type thing. And she has a lot of experience in merchandising. But we had Kat, who has a very significant data background. She's working as a data scientist at Uber. She pulled a bunch of historic data and it lined up exactly as what the founder of the company had done. So it was really cool to see she actually is a part of the community and she had nailed it so perfectly, just using intuition. So I think if a big company is trying to get into a community, they need to hire someone or bring someone on board or even pull someone from the community to help manage that relationship and kind of integrate themselves.
This way, it seems that you can truly have somebody that can be the eyes and ears of that audience and keep you truthful and on point versus somebody who's thinking they can be, or probably having some biases that come into play if you're not truly reflective of that audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
You likely can't serve a mass market better than a large company with more resources and more people. But if you focus your efforts on a smaller niche audience, you could build a compelling brand that can command a higher price point. That requires you to build an authentic relationship with this audience, which means you really need to understand them intimately. And Mehtab and his team have found that the best way to do so is to be part of that community or work closely with someone who is. Of course, you also need a product to sell to that audience. So how do we determine what the right product is while also mitigating potential losses and risk?
So what we'll usually do is at a high level, we'll have an idea for a few different products and we'll just start rinsing our audience and existing customer base through polls to find out which direction they feel we should go in. So if we have, say we're a cereal company and we want to know if we should make a cereal that tastes sugary, sweet, or sour, we would ask them what they want. And based on that, we would triage accordingly. And then after that, we kind of go into different phases. We'd ask them for input, et cetera. And the best thing is this costs nothing. Even if you have a large email list, you're not paying per email that you send out. And nobody gets mad when you ask them for input either. People love that you're being genuine and you actually want to see what they want and you're making what they want. They get attached to it. It's kind of like the IKEA effect, if you're familiar with that, where people are more proud and they rate things higher that they helped build. It's literally the same thing, the same kind of underlying idea behind it. And then once we've collected that data, it's important to recognize that it's fairly biased. So we'll go out and we'll run tests. Facebook ads are one of our favorite ways to do that if the product's appropriate for it. And the beautiful thing there is you can really do that with whatever budget you have, from as little as $5 a day all the way up to $500,000 a day. And it's very scalable. And then just as another hedge, we typically use pre-orders just to get a good idea of what the appetite really is for the product. Because, I mean, you might have a lot of people saying they're going to buy something, but once they see it as a cohesive whole, they don't want it at all. So the pre-order approach lets you hedge risk fairly significantly. And that's actually more of a byproduct of us being bootstrapped than anything. It's just trying to hedge as much risk as possible. And really, you can't go wrong with a pre-order because the cash is there. And all you're really doing is handing it off to a manufacturer and saying, hey, press play on this. And then it's a big win for everybody. And then we tend to drill down. It depends on the specific company and the product, but I like to drill down quite a bit into even like the exact color of packaging or the product And it helps quite a bit. Like people love it. Like they'll be like, oh, hey, yeah, I voted for that particular shade of purple, and now it's that particular shade of purple. It's really cool because they get the product, and they really did genuinely help us build it. And it's a big win-win. I think everyone likes it.
So it seems like you're really pulling every possible dimension of the product or experience that would have potentially an impact on their level of interest. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you're pulling things out, you're doing this with that very niche community that you've been targeting this whole time. So you then already have a predisposition to knowing what that tight-knit community is interested in because it's very focused. But yet it sounds like you still evaluate things through these Facebook ads to ensure that you're not getting biased data along the way.
Yeah, and I mean, like the data is always going to be biased just because we're not. It depends how all out you want to go with it. Like even just running ads on Facebook, for example, means you're hitting people who are on Facebook, which means it's kind of biased. But for the size of companies we're running at, top line's only really going to be 20 million max. It's not really an issue.
Is there anything else that you do to minimize risk? Because that is one of the key things I think most people are really concerned of when they're developing that new product experience.
It depends on which end of the business. So there's the marketing and product end, which I think we've covered quite a bit. There's also things like if you're manufacturing in-house, for example, you don't want to do something like build a new facility or expand into a new facility without adding more shifts first and maximizing everything you can get out of the existing facility first. I mean, it depends on where you are, but it's just little things like that can help minimize risks. Or you don't want to scale your manufacturing facility based off of Black Friday sales, since it's obviously very skewed and seasonal. Yeah, there's a lot we do just kind of all over the place. I'm just trying to think of another good example. I mean, on the financing side, for example, we try to make sure that a company's at the size to where they can get non-recourse debt versus just going out and loading up on debt and saying, all right, yeah, let's build a company. We want to make sure it's non-recourse. We're not out. We work closely with our financing partners to make sure we don't lose their money. But obviously the risk is much lower that way when the debt's not tied to you personally. It's just tied to the company.
Karta Ventures' product development approach centers on building the right product for the right people. They create evangelist user bases so that the consumer interest in the products is truly organic in nature. And creating a product that your very targeted audience wants starts with simply asking for their input. This helps you determine what their wants and needs are. It's important to understand that although the data you acquire through polling is valuable, it is incredibly biased. So to mitigate risk before actually building the product, you want to do additional micro-testing, such as digital advertising through Facebook and assessing interest via pre-orders. You might even want to consider your financing strategies. Once you have the first of the 4 P's of marketing, the product, and possibly the price, you have to effectively promote that product. And as Mehtab will tell us, this may mean putting aside the myths and misconceptions that still drive marketing today.
I think probably the biggest misconception just around the marketing side is that push marketing is going to be as effective as it was 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And even around digital ads where you get intrusive. We're big fans of paid social, for example, but we try to do it in a way that's not intrusive and it's more of a pull type ad, if you will. I think just push marketing in general is not going to be what it was, and it's certainly already sort of dying out. People aren't going around clicking on. If you look at traditional click-through rates on programmatic advertising, they've fallen a lot. They're starting to improve again, but especially on the Google platform, they've just fallen so significantly just because people are used to it now and they know it's an ad and they don't really want to click on it. So the better way to do it is to build really solid, tailored value to that audience and then pull them in and make them want to click on it and make them want to follow you and show them how they're going to benefit from it.
Another thing you mentioned is this whole thing of having an evangelist and partnering with an influencer. Tell me more about that too.
Yeah. So originally our first, like for Blue Mountain Horizon, they partnered with influencers. And it just allowed us to skip over having to build our own audience in-house, which can be expensive. I mean, there's totally doable without spending a lot of money, but it just takes more time. So we partnered with them initially, and that allowed us to create a community very, very quickly and then launch the product based on the feedback of their community, as well as, obviously they're not influencers because they don't know their niche. They're influencers because they know their niche really well. So their input was crucial too. And then obviously having a face that you can throw on the product helps a lot, but it's less about that and more leveraging their community to really figure out what people want and very quickly. And then once you've kind of figured out what your organic referral base looks like and cash flow starts coming in, you can build a marketing team to amplify that and assist with organic referrals as opposed to, hey, buy this, please. It's more of a, hey, let's grow this the right way and let's pull people in where it's sensible. Because what I think a lot of people try to do too is sell the wrong product to the wrong person, and that backfires because they're not going to leave you a good review. And reviews are a very big part of building a successful e-commerce brand, especially now. So we always try to make sure we're selling to the right people, and that kind of integrates with marketing.
I don't know if whether it's a misconception or whether it's just a common approach that they do that might not be the right one, is that they think of investing in having the people in place first. So once you have the people and pay all this money to have the people to do the work, that's when you will start to see the traction. So for example, your point of the marketing team is that you need to have the marketing people in place to then be able to get the traction in terms of, interest from your audience and purchases and so forth.
Right. Yeah, you're correct.
So instead, it's not about necessarily investing in the people. I take away that you're really investing in a process, doing this small, iterative testing approach with minimal resources to constantly gauge where you are, what's at level of interest and what's at level of potential. And based on that, that's when you learn at what point you start to invest in the physical resources or the people resources, and even operational resources to ensure that you can continue to build that traction and reach the goals that you want to reach.
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it. And it's just, it's limiting your, especially capital expenditures. Those can be really brutal. But obviously overhead in terms of actual hard team members or employees, that can get fairly brutal quickly too if you mismanage it or you overhire. So I'm ensuring that there's proper demand and building around demand as opposed to trying to generate demand with just people and money. Like it can backfire very badly. So for us, it's always been following demand or generating demand first and following that. And that kind of comes probably from Alex and I both being marketers by our nature as well as where we started.
So to close, knowing what you know now, what additional advice would you give to those looking to either develop or grow their business, whether it's a startup or even a mature one?
And the biggest thing is getting really good at systemizing and deploying micro tests to know which direction to push your business in and following the data and really learning to filter out any sort of emotional bias. It can be really tempting to do one thing just because you love the idea of it. And that can work. I mean, it's totally worked for a bunch of people in the past, but that's more luck than anything. If you've read Black Swan, that's probably good. That's kind of what changed my mindset. I'd encourage anyone else to read that book by Nicholas Taleb. It's really good. Yeah, that's probably the biggest one is just really micro-testing, following data and following demand as opposed to just what a gut feeling you have. And the gut feeling can work again, but if a gut feeling works, it's because you got lucky. It's not really, it's not something you can replicate and scale. So.
And finally, what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Yeah, probably just LinkedIn if you just search my name or our website, just kartaventures.com. And we're always happy to talk to anyone. We're not overly formal or anything. We love talking to entrepreneurs, even if they don't quite meet our typical revenue range that we look at. We just like to speak to them beforehand as well, just so when they do get there, we're their first call.
Great. Thanks so much for your time today. Really great insight and a completely different way to look at building a business.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
When it comes to launching a new business, The business mindset is about starting very small and really understanding your audience first. Be an active part of their community. Listen to their needs and fundamentally work to solve their problems so that you can build an evangelist user base. And then take a data-driven approach to building the right product. You can conduct a lot of product research and marketing with a limited budget if you form the right relationships. And if you leverage those relationships and data correctly, you can even mitigate the financial investment and risk that goes into developing a product. And make sure to build around the demand versus trying to generate demand with people and money. Because if you've been good at systematizing and deploying your microtests, you will be able to build and scale a compelling business that delivers value without betting the house. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can connect with Mehtab on LinkedIn and learn more about Karta Ventures at kartaventures.com. If you've liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review. This is what helps others find the podcast. To hear previous episodes or get show notes from this episode, you can visit us at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. And don't forget to give us a like on our new Facebook page and follow us on Instagram for more career tips and advice. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.